This is the Authentic Change Podcast, and I am Mike Horne. Authenticity reflects what we want from each other and our organizations: open communication, trust, community, fun, and opportunity. I want to help you to do your best in your personal and professional relationships. This podcast delivers expertise, insights, and approaches on authentic leadership, to live your purpose, to lead from your values, to establish connected relationships, to steward people and culture change, to build and sustain prosperity, and to open doors and possibilities. This podcast will assist you in paving the way forward to personal, team, and organizational prosperity. Welcome to another episode of the Authentic Change Podcast with Mike Horne. I am delighted today to welcome Michael Melcher, who is, I'm just going to read from the LinkedIn profile, and I'll modify it ever so slightly. He describes himself as a global leadership coach, but I've also heard him describe himself as an executive coach based in New York City. So I think those two are synonymous. He has a global practice based out of New York City. How about that way? He's also a partner in Next Step Partners, which is a global coaching firm, and host of the Career Stewardship podcast. I've listened to several episodes. They're awesome. The Career Stewardship podcast with Michael Melcher, just an awesome podcast. Please listen. Author of The Creative Lawyer, an NPR guest contributor, and a super dad. And just for that super dad image, I would encourage you to visit Michael's LinkedIn profile. It's part of his branding identity, but I'll let him explain that. Again, Michael, I'm just so delighted that you're here. And I wonder if you could say and introduce yourself in some words.
Well, professionally, I think you got it. I work in the field of leadership development with an executive coaching approach, which is basically a question-based approach to helping people grow and develop. But when I was thinking about who am I, and also your title here, all about authenticity, I think being a dad is very much part of it, and in particular, being a gay dad. It's become so much part of my identity. It's sort of like the person I was waiting to become for a good part of my life. So I'd say that. And in terms of the globalism, I think I'm a global person in the sense that I believe that people in other countries are as human as anybody in our own country. And while there are differences, there are a lot of similarities and common issues if we're curious enough to discover them. And the final thing I would say is that I am a believer in nuance at a time when people seem to spend a lot of time slamming each other in big Twitter type generalizations. I don't think life is obvious. I don't think justice is obvious. I don't think change is obvious. I think it requires a lot of nuance and a willingness to be curious and question and listen. And I think we could kind of use a lot more of that nowadays.
That's so wonderful. And really, it provides us with so many points of departure to describe and to discuss authenticity. For me, it's congruency. It's the alignment of our words and actions, and even better if we think about the ABCs: attitudes, behaviors, cognitions, ways of thinking, words and actions, when they all line up. And I think that results in happiness. And we can go to that topic soon. I resonate with this one, with one of the comments that you offered on our common interests and our common humanity. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the Solomon Islands.
Wow.
And I had one of those experiences, and I think this is probably politically incorrect to say, but what was described at that time as a fourth world assignment. It was a remote speck in the middle of the Pacific with, I think, monthly air traffic from the capital on, and still required some canoeing. But what that experience provided to me was this profound sense of difference, right? I mean, being dropped into a village and village life, and but it also gave me an acute awareness for what we struggle and what we desire, and perhaps cement in my belief that everyone deserves to be loved. And perhaps maybe that's an entree to coaching and helping others, and just curious about that and how you discovered that.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that part about the Peace Corps, because my first career was as a young foreign service officer in the Department of State. And I spent a year living in Calcutta when I was 24. And I took from that the same thing that you're saying, which is that there are profound differences in terms of cultures and where we grow up and what opportunities we have and what a normal life kind of looks like. But I also think that people can get very precious when they're talking about difference and different cultures. Like I remember in elementary school, we learned a lot about other lands, like, well, in this land, they do this, and I feel that has now reemerged in a way with identitarian politics and people kind of defining themselves by multiple intersecting identities, as if you just drop all these factors into something that spits out a person. And I think that's not really accurate. I think it's kind of overly precious. I've lived in a lot of different countries, and I've also done coaching and different types of workshops. And I remember doing this workshop in Haiti, of all places, and it was about competency-based interviewing. It was for a global health organization. And people, primarily Haitian in that group, got as much out of that type of workshop as in anywhere else. And so I feel like if we're willing to be curious, there are a lot more common human interests underneath. And I don't think they're that hard to get to if you can be open. And also, to your point, I think that people around the world experience and define authenticity all in the same way. No matter where you go, you can kind of tell whether somebody is being authentic or kind of fake. The coding might be a little bit different, but I think everybody is kind of assessing it the same way.
It's so interesting. I'll pick up on the Haiti example, and being immersed in a different culture and teaching something and wondering how it might land. Or when I worked for one of the big HR consulting firms, one of my clients was the Rotorua District Council in New Zealand. And I was helping them install performance management systems. I admit it now. That was once part of my life, performance management, helping people with behaviorally anchored rating scales and all kinds of other crazy nonsense. Man, I'm curious about how those foreign experiences, and maybe how the foreign service experience in Calcutta, how did it support you growing into developing into your gay dadhood? Because that's what I heard you introduce, as being sort of fundamental to who you are.
I'll give you a couple of reflections. The first is that when I went overseas, I went to India, I went to Mexico, I went to various other countries, I went to Taiwan. I was drawn toward it. It was just something within me. It was a kind of value, and I wouldn't have used that language at the time, but it would travel and experiencing other cultures and learning other languages. Those are just things that are really important to me. And so when I was being my most natural, I then made those things happen. And, for some people, it might seem like orchestrating those sorts of overseas experiences might be difficult, but I don't remember any aspect of it at all being difficult. I sort of made it happen because it was something very true to me. So I think the lesson there was, when I let myself be myself, things came, I don't know if easily is the word, but they managed to come. The second thing is that when you are out of your own culture, in a lot of ways, it helps you see yourself as you really are. So it's interesting, like one of my first coming out experiences, my first visit to a gay bar was in Taiwan when I was 19. And I've observed this with a fair number of other people I've met, that they've had these kinds of self-acceptance moments when they're outside of the US. And I think it's because in some ways you feel it doesn't really count. and therefore you can just be yourself. You can kind of set aside the social conditioning and be who you really are. And then when you are that person, you become a lot stronger in it. You can kind of bring it back home with you. And then the final thing is, I think I also learned to fight for what was important to me, even if other people didn't want to give it to me. So one reason I left the Foreign Service is that it was a very homophobic institution at the time I was there. Like, they would kind of nab the gay people by alleging that we were violating security protocols. And then if they could pull your security clearance, that would prevent you from getting assigned to places. And it wasn't really stated openly. It was more like this landmine that you might step on or might not step on. But, it was kind of gross. And I didn't want to be part of that. And I was in a long distance relationship with my then boyfriend, and it was a really important relationship for me. And I kind of had to pick either the Foreign Service or the relationship. And I just thought, well, I've been pretty successful in my career so far, but I haven't been that successful in love. So let me try that. So I think that recognition that if I want something, I might have to fight it, plus the recognition that sometimes you have to make choices, all that, led the way more than 20 years later to me going through all the steps of becoming a gay dad, which I did through surrogacy and in vitro fertilization, which is an extremely complex, expensive, and legally uncertain process. But, I had the wherewithal to do it.
So if I was synthesizing the two elements that I heard or that stand out for me are, one, it was just natural. It was who you are instinctively. And then secondly, that sort of those experiences that helped to craft that naturalness also gave you a desire to fight for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how do you see that in your coaching clients? I mean, do you think that's something that you observe, this natural instinct, these natural, I don't want to call them impulses, these anchors maybe? How does that lead for the courage to fight, particularly if it's not rooted in some values you might like?
Well, I think that the core of all coaching and all personal change is based on understanding your own values. It's based on self-awareness. Now, self-awareness often requires self-discovery because we aren't really accustomed to looking inside and thinking about, well, who am I really? Like, forget this person I've created by age 20, 25, 30, 35, et cetera, that's pleasing to other people. Who am I really? What's important to me? What am I actually good at? What do I enjoy doing and not enjoy doing? Let me just take a break from trying to convince people I can do it and just think about what is really important to me. So that's a big part of it. And I think that people are hungry for this. It doesn't require the most sophisticated exercises or discussions in the world to get to this. People can start finding their way toward that. Then it's, what am I actually interested in? Where do I want to grow, or what do I want to do? And that is often a process of experimentation and discovery. Like, it's not like you'll just get the lightning bolt one day. It's a kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, a step sideways, a leap forward. That's how you get there. And so much of what I'm doing with my clients, whether it's working on leadership or team functioning or thinking about their careers, it's how do you create these experiments where you're doing something and you're gathering data on what result you get and how you feel, and just trying that out rather than waiting for some big, bold, lightning bolt to hit you.
Sure. Life isn't I often use the expression, life isn't a science experiment. Rather, we need to be experimental with our approaches in order to grow and change and develop. And so I'm curious, Michael, what are some of if you were to articulate some of the values that guide your coaching practice and who you are today? I don't know if those are really separable or distinguishable.
That's a really good question. Let me think about that for a second.
Yeah, when I think about it, for me, I think about this question sometimes because I'm often asked, have you ever met an authentic jerk? And I say, of course I have. But, for me, I mean, this sense of authenticity grows out of a set of humanistic values, right? It's about respect for the individual. It's about finding dignity in all of life's forms. It's about it's about having diverse ideas and diverse people around you so that you can grow inclusion. So I know that those have shaped, and extended my work out to, how do you create more participative systems? How do you create democracy? Okay. So, yeah.
All right. So it's interesting. I'm not sure how picky I am about the people I work with. It's possible I'm much more picky than I realize. But what you really want, what I really want in a client is somebody who is coachable. And we would say coachability means you're willing to look inside, you're willing to go deeper, you're willing to ask these questions. And to some degree, you have the capacity for doing that. Not everybody really has it. So yeah, sometimes clients, we get along like a prairie fire in the first 5 minutes. It's the easiest conversation in the world. But I've also had clients that have been described as jerks or assholes, or clients where it really took me a while to feel connected in communication style, but that really achieved amazing changes. And I don't sort of select people by career or issue they're working on, because my basic feeling is that a lot of adults are, when they come to me, they're kind of stuck in a cul-de-sac. Like they've grown to a certain point, but then they're not sure how to get out of it and how to move beyond it. And that cul-de-sac could present as a lot of different things. It could be presented as they're frustrated in their career, or they haven't gone as far as they want to, or they're not great at relationships, or they're not great at task execution, whatever it is. And my belief is that once people are able to get out of that cul-de-sac, who knows what they might be capable of, right? So when I wrote this book, The Creative Lawyer, one of my motivations was that lawyers are among the best educated 2% of the population, yet a lot of them go through their life acting and seeing themselves as powerless, right? So how is it that you could be powerless if you're in that position? And my feeling was that if they could just get out of that cul-de-sac and start moving forward in a direction that is meaningful to them, the world's going to benefit. Like they have a lot of gifts, they have a lot of capabilities to use for some kind of forward action. And they might go work for the UN, they might run a law firm, who knows, they might go work for Fox News, I don't know. Either way, it's going to be some kind of more positive contribution than we're able to have when we're kind of stuck.
Right. Progression, regression, getting stuck in these loops. So getting back to the values that you're leading with in these engagements.
Do you mean the value, like how I regard my own work?
Yes.
All right. Well, first, you have to kind of believe in the client. You have to believe that they have the capability of doing the work and moving forward. And my original mentor coach, this guy named Clark Fredericks, he once told me, if you don't believe in your client, they're in trouble, right? So you just can't be in those engagements. Either you believe in it or you don't. If you don't, then get out, do something else. The second thing I would say is, as a coach, I have to manage my ego constantly. And I've been doing this for like 20 years now, but it's still a thing. And what that means is coaching is about the client. The coachee is not about the coach. And so if I'm concerned, like, well, do they think I'm doing a good job? Are they getting enough value out of it? Do they like me? I'm already on the path of not being a good coach. You have to kind of be willing to set aside all that, because if you're too worried about what they think about you, you're not really honoring the experience. And then I would say the final thing is you have to be comfortable with ambiguity and lack of resolution. So there's a type of, I would call it beginner coaching, that is very focused on accountability, as if the coach is kind of blowing a whistle, like, what are you going to do? When are you going to do it? Will you tell me when? And there's some value in that. But that's not really how life works and how people change. And so many times the issue you're working on or trying to make progress on, there isn't any resolution in one session or 5 sessions or 10 sessions or several months. There's progress, but there's not a neat bow. And I would say the difference between a coach who's pretty good in one conversation and one who is really good in the long term is, can you carry that space, can you carry that discussion forward over a period of many months so that the person can engage in this larger arc of change rather than trying to just wrap it all up in a handful of discussions.
So these concepts of belief and ego and how it's affected by the perception and dimension of time and relationship, it reminds me of, why I wrote Integrity by Design. It didn't come to me until after it was finished. And I think it was so that everyone could have a best friend at work, borrowing on some of that Gallup Q12 research, the statement, I have a best friend at work, I strongly agree, strongly disagree. It's a predictor of engagement. And I think when, if I combine these elements around belief and ego and relationship balanced by time, it reminds me that when someone says, you've got this, or I have your back, it makes an incredible difference in the possibilities that can unfold. I think both for the coach and for the coachee, or however you want to describe that pair.
Mm-hmm.
It's a pathway I would agree with that. One of the things that I heard you say is that you have to believe in the client. You have to believe in that possibility. You have to additionally keep the focus on the client, not focused on, am I doing a good job? And you have to hold the ambiguity so that you know that this can be a conversation that could continue over time. So with those 3 items, is that a way that you contract with a coachee, with a client for your work? How do those get made explicit?
Okay. Well, that's a good question. I'm not a particularly explicit contractor in the coaching sense. I'm a little bit heterodox that way, I guess. When I'm meeting with somebody, I'm sitting down, I usually had an initial conversation with them where I get a bit of the lay of the land. I usually give them a questionnaire that will give me a lot of background information very quickly. So essentially, when I'm talking to them, I'm asking kind of, what's your story? And usually it's a story of where they are right now and what's on their mind and what is, what they're trying to figure out. And then sometimes it will go into a deeper type of background story. And I would say that what I strive to do is really listen quite deeply. What I end up doing is a combination of listening and then maybe we can call it framing based on my understanding of the situation. So I'll ask them a kind of open-ended question, what's going on, and how do you feel about this, and what would you like to achieve, and where do you see yourself in your career, those sorts of things. And then I'll listen. And then based on what they're saying, I'll ask more questions, or sometimes I'll just sort of frame it like, all right, sounds like this job is getting kind of stale, or you've spent much of your life being a kind of agreeable team player, and now you're ready to not miss out so much. those sorts of observations. And so I guess what's happening there is that I'm showing that I have, or I'm trying to have empathy for whatever they're going through, but also that I'm kind of an objective thinker, and I'm going to give them my interpretation of what I'm seeing. So there's a type of like orthodox coaching that's purely questions. It's almost like a psychoanalyst who's just not adding any particular interpretation and just letting the patient talk. I would say I practice a bit more of a whole person coaching, meaning that when people come to me, it's because they want the entire Michael Melcher. They don't want just who I was trained in coaching school to be. So I, will sometimes offer interpretations or even suggestions. I do try to hold off toward the end of the session so that if I'm giving any kind of advice, it's coming after I've really taken in everything and not just the first 5 minutes. And then we're, together creating a sort of framework for what will happen next and what kind of steps you can take. And I, as a coach, I do think I'm pretty good at turning our discussions into questions or exercises or activities that the clients can consider doing between sessions. And then we meet again and we see how that goes. And those kind of homework assignments are a bit of a hypothesis. It's like, okay, did you do it? Was it the right thing? Did you do something else? And then over time, I'm kind of helping them create the narrative arc of what we're doing. Like, where do we start from? What were the questions facing? And then what do we learn in the process? And kind of where are we regarding those issues now?
Maybe this is, your congruency that you demonstrate the belief, you hold your ego in check, you work with these other elements of relationship as a process without being explicit about them. And
yeah, maybe I should hire somebody to come and analyze me.
No, it wasn't that intent, but it's a way of demonstrating your congruency. And hey, just maybe a last question, because I'm so curious. Again, I was listening to the great a podcast you were doing with Dory Clark, and I think I heard you say, or maybe heard both of you banter on the topic of being in the self-efficacy business. Is that right?
Yeah, I actually got that phrase from this woman. I think her name is Melissa Irvin, who wrote The Whole 30, which is that kind of diet cleansing book. Right. And she used this phrase self-efficacy, and she said, it means I can do hard things. And I did The Whole 30, but I allowed myself to drink wine every night, so I'm not sure it really counted. And nor did it get any actual results, but I really liked them. But I did get this phrase self-efficacy. Yeah, it's how do I make the most of myself? How do I achieve a greater amount of agency? How do I harness what is within me into something that's of value to me? And I think one of the reasons I became a coach is that for the first 35 plus years of my life, nothing was more interesting to me than my own potential, right? And how to achieve what it promised. And yet I had a number of job experiences that they were like jobs that were hard to get, but they were not jobs that gave me a great deal of permanent satisfaction or kind of fed deeper things that apparently I wanted fed. So I ended up thinking a lot about, how do you grow, and can you grow, and what do careers really mean, and how do you get there? And then I think I then applied that. So these are all self-efficacy topics, right? And then I think I would just add that I also, was kind of observing the world that I grew up in, where jobs were changing, careers were changing, culture was changing. And I found that all very interesting. And okay, within that, then how do you carve out your own path, and how much is actually up to you? And what's not, and how do you then optimize the things that are under your control to get what you want and also be a good person in the world.
Right. I mean, it is becoming more of who you are, or perhaps as Jung observed, the greatest privilege of a lifetime, becoming who you are. And
that's a good quote. I like that. I'm going to use that.
That's it. You know, the three observations Jung made frame a lot of my work. One was his statement that you are what you do, not what you say you'll do. Secondly, the greatest privilege of a lifetime is becoming who you are. And thirdly, in order to, I'll paraphrase this, to do anything about the first two, you have to accept where you are and who you are. So, there we go. That's our work. That's a lot
to chew on, Mike.
That's a lot to chew on, Michael.
I'm gonna chew on that.
Michael, fabulous. How would our audience be in touch with you if they wanted to contact you? What are the best coordinates for you?
Sure. You can always just Google Michael Melcher and it will take you to some email address or another. You can look at my podcast website, which is careerstewardship.com. You can also look at my company's website, which is nextsteppartners.com. And there is an info section where I'm listed there as well.
Okay, that's fabulous. Thank you for being such an awesome guest on the Authentic Change podcast with Mike Horne. I'm just delighted that we've had this opportunity to connect. And I say thank you for being present here. And I'd encourage our audience to be in touch with Michael Melcher on any of the channels that he described. Just do a Google search, Michael Melcher, go to nextsteppartners.com, visit his podcast on, could you say the name of the podcast one more time, Michael?
Yeah, careerstewardship.com.
Career Stewardship. Find it where you find your favorite podcast. Again, thank you. And until the next episode of Authentic Change, be well. Thanks for listening. And I hope you'll subscribe today and tell a friend about our show. If you're looking for hands-on help to increase your success through authentic change, or have a question you'd like to hear me answer here, please email me at mike@mike-horne.com.